I'm Johnny Buchanan, and in this video we're going to look at what I refer to as old school audio editing. Now these days there are loads of tools that are available to us to help us get audio files in time. We've got flex editing, for instance, or we've got the idea of groove matching, all kinds of things. But once upon a time when dinosaurs roamed the earth and computers, right, dinosaurs, anyway, I'll go with this analogy. Back in the day when we just had the opportunity to start working with audio, what we really had to do was to get the scissors out and start chopping things up and placing things where we wanted them to be. And that remains a really valid, important technique to be able to have available to us, because sometimes using flex editing to analyze sort of transients and then asking quantize to be applied to those audio files actually produces kind of artifacts in the audio that we don't want. And also there are benefits sometimes to chopping up bits of audio and leaving gaps between them, crossfading other parts, all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to get a new audio part. We're going to bounce a MIDI region down to become audio, and then we're going to get it to match a slightly wonky groove that I've found called Ellis Island Beat, which is in the Apple Loop library. Go and find it if you want to work with that sound too. Now to get in our audio, I'm actually going to use my good friend here, the Touche pedal. It's called a pedal, but it actually sits on the desk. This is made by Expressive E, and you may remember it if you've ever watched the trailer for this channel. It's time to give it its debut in this one of these videos too. Now the sound that I want to record is actually in the demo, the trailer demo, and it doesn't make any noise when I first press a note until I start playing with the pedal, which is, as you can imagine, quite a lot of fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to record a little loop to go over this groove, and then we'll see where we are. Okay, I'm going to turn off the cycle and we'll just record this part in. Okay, so there's my bit of MIDI. Okay, what I'm actually going to do is to quantize it. Now remember, that isn't going to put all those little bits of expression that I've just recorded in time. All it's going to do is to make sure that the notes that I've actually played start on the downbeat. I'm not cheating, I promise. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to convert this to an audio file. In fact, I've made an audio track here. So what I'm going to do is to select this region. I'm going to bounce it in place, which we can find in bounce and join if it's not in the list of options up at the top. I'm going to select bounce in place, and this time I'm going to select the selected track, and I'm just going to call it wonky chords. And what that will do is to put it on the selected track, this audio track that I've made already, and then it's going to put it there, and it will mute the original part because I asked it to. Okay, so what we've now got a chance to do is to see this as an audio file, and the advantage of that becomes clear when we zoom in and we have a look at the audio next to this beat loop that I'm using. Now to really understand how kind of wonky this groove is, what I'm actually going to do is to turn on the metronome, solo this part by literally just muting the wonky chords part, and we'll have a listen to this loop relative to the metronome, and you're going to hear that lots of the little transient moments aren't in time. Now, I've spoken on the channel elsewhere about the fact that with grooves like this, the temptation is just say, right, let's get out flex editing and let's analyze these individual transients and let's get them absolutely bang in time. But the charm of a loop like this is the fact that it's not in time. And actually what I really want to do is to use this as a kind of groove idea for the whole of my track rather than eliminate everything that's interesting about its rhythm. So what I'm going to do is move my pedal just ever so slightly out of the way for a moment so that I can just zoom in here a little bit more and begin to analyze the audio file that I have just recorded relative to the groove that the drum beat is playing. Now I can see that the rhythm that I have played in, which is a little bit all over the place, uses some dominant moments, transient moments, where the groove is not so loud. And then there are other moments where actually they're a little bit sort of more locked in, and yet I can see that obviously because I've played this in live, these two bits of audio don't line up. The chord part that I've played is late, and it doesn't lock here, either where I've played a little bit earlier. So let's just have a listen to the two bits of audio next to each other. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get out our old school scissors and start chopping up this file. Okay, now weirdly, I'm actually going to start right here. I've made this little sort of triplet but figure, which I really want to have be sort of more in time than it is right now. And the thing about audio editing is you can kind of start anywhere. Now, the thing we have to do, however, if we're going to start in the middle of the file, is to be a little bit careful. Remember, by moving audio files, you will move everything in that audio file. So right now, if I move this green region, everything would move, and I don't want everything to move. So what I'm going to do is to grab the scissors, and I'm going to chop at this point here, which is the first bit I do want to move. And then what I'm going to do is to chop again here, which I think is the end of this section that I want to address. So effectively what I'm going to do is to just work on this area here. Now, I want this sort of triplet feel to be a bit more in time. Firstly, I can see that I've missed the drum beat that sits underneath it. So this is definitely all late. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it back. Now, for now, I'm not worrying about the fact that this audio file is moving over this one. I can always move it back and I'll be back to where I started. However, I need to be careful because we have a tool up here which will either allow for overlaps or no overlaps. Now, what that basically means is that if I select the no overlap option and I move this file back to this point, what it will effectively have done is to make sure that this file has now been adjusted at its right corner, which means that if I then move this one back, I'm going to end up with a hole, because rather than sliding this bit of audio over that one, I've literally just punched a hole in it every time I move it. And now if I move this back, that hole is going to be bigger. So I'm just going to undo a few steps and get this audio to be back where it was a moment ago and undo my edits even. And I'm going to make sure that I'm allowing for overlaps, because that way I'm not going to be eating into the audio file. And that's really an important place to start. So let's come back and find our little triplet figure again. So it's this section here, which starts here, and I'm going to sort of punch out there at the end of that note. So now that I've got overlap on, what I'm in a position to do is to move this back, and I'm going to start that note where it happens in the beat loop. Now, because this is a triplet, because this is a different figure to the way that the drum groove is working, I'm not interested in that moment there and trying to make that line up. It turns out that actually that moment is kind of lined up, which is luck, not judgment, but I definitely want this note to arrive on the downbeat with this moment here. So again, I'm going to get out the scissors tool. Again, I'm going to chop. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to move this back. Now you can see if I come back to the very first note that I've played, the nature of the sound that I've recorded with the Touche pedal is that it doesn't have a really sharp attack. These aren't transient in the same way that the beat loops are. Here I've got a really sharp attack. I can see how vertical that bit of audio is, whereas this is much smoother. It's kind of fading in. So I have to decide, and again, I don't know, whether or not I want to line up the very beginning of this bit of audio where it first starts, or whether or not effectively kind of where this note is really established is kind of where I want to line those up with the beats. Remember, I can always move things around if I need to. So I'm just going to listen to that little triplet figure that I've created. Now you can see that because of the fact that I've allowed these audio files to overlap, I've got this little dotted line here showing me the right-hand edge of this file, and the fact that this one is sitting on top of it. And I've got something similar happening over here as well. I think there are 3 files now which are kind of competing with each other. I'm going to worry about that in a moment. For now, I just want to see whether or not this little triplet figure is kind of working from beat 4 into this sort of downbeat here. What I need to do is just to come into snap to beat, and I want to just have that run literally from bar 4, beat 4, into beat 2 of the following bar. Okay, so the triplet is working really nicely, but the sort of swerve into this beat is too early. Now again, what I could do would be to grab the control button and simply just move this. That's me clicking on too many buttons at once. I could just move this by grabbing the audio, holding control and just doing a subtle little movement if I wanted to. But I don't. What I actually want to do instead is to nudge this region. So I'm going to take my fingers off all of these things, and what I'm going to do instead is to drop this little bar down here to open up these extended tools. At the bottom of the transport bar, I have an opportunity just literally to hover, and I'll see that the cursor changes. And if I click here and drag downwards, what I have a chance to do is to open up these extended tools, which we had a moment ago, and here they are again. And what I've got a chance to do here is to select what's called a nudge value. Now, nudging audio allows me to literally move it around from left to right. And I can either do that in really big, quite sort of chunky sections. I could move things by bars if I wanted to, or I can select ticks, which are tiny fractions of a semiquaver, if you like, tiny little areas. Or I can go in multiples of 10 of those. Now, again, I need to be careful. I've just changed my snap value to a beat. And what I really want to do is to come back to smart, which means that I'm not going to be snapping audio to specific locations. So I've selected my nudge value as 10 ticks. And what I'm going to do in order to nudge something is I'm going to select this bit of audio. I'm going to hold down Option, and then I'm going to use the arrows. And what I can see is that this little bit of audio is moving left and right, and it's doing so in little 10 tick values. Okay, so what I can do is I can line it up with this downbeat here so that that's absolutely going to be perfectly in time. Let's again run that. Okay, so actually being perfectly in time sounds early. So I've nudged it back a little bit further. I'm going to go one more set of 10 ticks. Okay, and I like that more. Okay, now we've just dived into the middle of this audio file, which seems like an odd place to start. But what I'm also going to do, and I like to do this when I'm editing, is I'm going to change the color of the sections that I've edited. I know those have been fixed now. I'm happy with those bits. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go back to the beginning of the file, having sort of shone a light on the way that we're going to go about doing this. And I'm going to put a loop around bar 1. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to get the scissors out. I'm going to chop things up, and I'm going to get them in time. And we'll go bar by bar just to see if we can get an interesting groove out of this area. So again, I'm going to just chop at bar 3 so that I know where I'm kind of finishing this first edit. Okay, let's have a go. Okay, that's bar 1. I'm happy with that. Let's move on to bar 2. I say bar 2 of the track, which is actually bar 3. So let's just set a little cycle range around here. Okay, there's not a lot to fix in here because we've already done the most important part. However, this beat is a little late and I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is just put a little chop here. And again, I'm going to use my little nudge control to just get this a bit better in time. Now this second hit, which happens here, or the second beat, I think is probably quite good. But this first one is probably still a little late. So I'm going to decouple those with another little chop. Let's just try that. Okay, so obviously we've now got a click. I'm not worrying about the clicks for now. I'm just getting my rhythms right. So let's move on to bar 4. Okay, this one feels a little bit early to me. And the great thing, of course, is if it turns out that it's not early and it's absolutely fine, but we're just going to try experimenting with things, we can always put them back where they were. So really not an issue as far as that's concerned. Yeah, there we are. And we'll just quickly look at bar 5 too. That's pretty good. Look at that. Jono got groove. Okay, let's just move this very last one because it's sort of feels like it could go that way just a tiny bit. Interestingly, I've managed to transpose that with an unexpected key command. I mean, you know, it's sort of great, isn't it? Okay, let's go back to being sensible. No transposition. So boring now, let's do that again. Look, exciting things happen at sea and in studios. All right, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back and have a listen all the way through. Okay, so there we are. I will make a decision about that in a little while, but I do kind of love it. All right, now then, we've got obviously some gaps, and we've got some overlaps, and we've got some clicks. So the next thing to do, having put things in time, is to think about how we're going to manage those. And there are a number of little key commands that can really help as far as this is concerned. So here's our first bit of audio, which overlaps with the next one. I can see that because of this little dotted line. I knew about that all along. So what I can do is to click here, and then I can select the bottom right-hand edge, and I can drag this back until the other file appears, and I can try really hard to get that to line up exactly, or I can undo that and use a key command to do that instead. So if I click and hold on this region, if I control click and hold on this region, what I can do is to come down to trim, and in trim I have an opportunity to trim the end to the start of the next region. Okay, and I can see that the key command for that is shift and backslash, which is here. So if I select this, rather than me having to manually adjust the end of that region to the start of the next one, that's going to happen automatically. And I think I'm right in saying that if I've learnt that correctly, yep, that's my key command. So shift and backslash is going to get me there. So for any regions where I've got overlaps, I can immediately select those, and I can use the same key command. And what that's going to do is to help us just manage the moments where the audio file before the next one is running on for too long. So we can do a whole bunch of those at once. And that has helped us to manage the first ones. Now there's a key command that we can use in reverse of that as well, which is going to help fill in gaps between one audio file and whatever comes before it. So I've got a gap here as well. So this time, rather than adjusting the end of the region, what I want to do is to adjust the start of it. Now again, what I can do is control click, come back down to trim, and this time we're going to come to trim start to previous region. Now at the moment there isn't a key command set up for this one. I could make one if I wanted to, but at the moment there isn't one. Now the only thing I need to be careful about here is I need to be careful what happens before the bit of audio that I've sliced. Is it going to match nicely with what comes before it? Well, that all depends on the audio files that you're using. If you're working with a really busy drum beat, it could be that by moving the left-hand edge along, you suddenly get back a little hi-hat that you were trying to cut out. Or maybe you end up with a weird little sort of moment between managing those two things. In this audio file that I'm using, actually there's quite a lot of sustained data between one bit of audio and the next. So it could be that with a little crossfade, I can manage that moment and make it sound quite musical. We'll see, we'll come back to that in a moment. So I'm going to use the same key command again here, and having used it once, it's now going to be up at the top of the most recent items that I've used. So I can just sort of bizz through here quite quickly and simply just fill in some of these gaps. Okay, now there is a moment that I was talking about. It looks to me like in moving that file, I've got a little bit of a ghost of the end of the previous file happening there. That might not sound so smooth. I'm going to manage that with a fade instead. So I'm going to just be a little bit cautious there. I'm going to get rid of that. Remember, anything that appears that looks a bit weird, I'm just going to undo and we'll be back to where we started. That's definitely going to be too long a gap. I'm bound to find, sure enough, that there's some stuff happening here that I'm not happy with. So what I'm going to do again is to leave that one well alone. Let's see what happens here. So again, let's just see. Yeah, that looks like that's going to be okay. And let's just see what happens right here at the end as well. Remember, this is currently our transpose region. So I need to be a little bit careful there, because obviously if I extend the length of the transpose region, the transposition will happen in a slightly odd place. So it might be better for me to see if I can extend the end of that region onto the next one instead. Okay, so it's trial and error, and it's definitely a little bit of experience in terms of what tends to work well managing one moment to the next. Now, the next thing I'm going to do for all of the regions that are joined up, that are actually connected to each other, which is most of them now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a crossfade. I'm going to select an equal power crossfade, which basically maintains the volume from one bit of audio to the next. And I don't need these to be very long. I just need them to manage any potential clicks. I'm going to try with 5 milliseconds to start with. Now, I can't do that for any of the files where I've got a gap. So here I'm going to need to put a little fade out on that audio file, which is just there. We should just about be able to see that. The green audio regions don't really help, but there's a little fade out on the end of that file. I should be able to put a crossfade between all three of those because they are actually touching each other. So what I'm going to do is just again, to just manage those. This is going to need a little fade in to make sure that it doesn't click at the very beginning. I'm going to need a fade out on this one because I've got a gap there as well. So I'm just going to select fade out, and then we're going to need a fade in too. So again, I'm just going through quite quickly and selecting the fades that I need to make sure that we don't get clicks. Okay, so I've done that now. Let's have a listen to how that sounds. And obviously we've edited it all now so it can all go to our lovely little orange color. Okay, so most of that is working really nicely. The groove is much, much better and it's working well. So what am I going to do about the moments where I've got gaps? Well, there are a couple of things I could do. I could put some reverb on this sound and that will just help just slightly manage those moments. Or if I really want to, I could potentially even experiment with the idea of maybe stretching a little bit of this audio to fill in the gaps. Now, again, who knows whether or not that's actually going to work. To do that, what I'm going to do is try this gap here by just cutting this last section, this last little bit. I don't want to fade the whole chord, I don't think. I'm just going to extend this out by holding down Option and dragging the bottom right-hand corner. And what that's going to do is to extend and stretch out that piece of audio. Now, Logic will automatically convert that to a new audio file, which is why it's changed color. And of course, what we can now potentially do would be to change those fade outs to a crossfade so that we're managing the transition between those sounds. And we'll also need to do the same thing at the beginning because now they're different pieces of audio. Let's try that now. In fact, actually, that hasn't added a crossfade. Let's just try that now because actually it sounds like that might work if only it doesn't click. Okay, so that needs a slightly smoother crossfade. So here what I'm going to do is to grab my fade tool and just try a fade over a longer period of time there. We'll see what that sounds like. Okay, that's sounding much, much better. So what I can do potentially is to stretch out these little bits of audio which are providing these gaps. Again, just remember that's Option and then stretch in the bottom right-hand corner just to fill in those gaps. And then what we need to do is to be managing the transitions from one file to another. I'm going to come back to the equal power and I'm just going to ever so slightly increase the length of that crossfade so that again, it should sound a little bit more natural. Okay, that takes me by surprise every time. So what we've got now is this really interesting chopped up groove where we've managed the sort of the moments from one bit of audio to the next, and we've looked at a number of different techniques for that. Now remember, we've done a lot. We got out the scissors, we manually moved things. Then what we did was to make sure, by the way, that our overlap option is on so that we're not rubbing out bits of audio as we shuttle things backwards and forwards. We've learnt that we can nudge regions so that we can just move them really small distances left and right and experiment with what happens when we just slightly push and pull audio around until it feels right. We've also learned some really important key commands for managing the ends of audio files in terms of how they bridge gaps up to the next bit of audio. And we've learned how to manage the front of audio files to pull things back as well. And when we've then created gaps, what we've then done is to use this time stretching technique in order to just fill in those gaps. And again, that's required some different management of fades in order to make all of that feel quite smooth. Now you can see that at the very bottom of this track, I've also brought in another audio loop. And this at the moment is a pattern region. And because it's a pattern region, it's got its own groove as well. So let's just have a listen to this just for a second against the metronome. So this rhythm is much straighter, okay? It's got a little bit of swing in it, but it's much more predictable. Well, we already know that the Ellis Island beat is the opposite of that. So if I was to run these two beats together, we're in trouble because they're gonna not lock. Okay, so we can hear that. This isn't going to work because obviously the kind of swung but relatively straight nature of this groove is again not going to work against our kind of wonky beat. But part of the reason why I've shown or tagged this on right onto the end of this video is because firstly what I can do is to convert this into a regular MIDI region. So firstly what I can do is to simply come down to convert and convert my pattern to a MIDI region, and immediately then that just becomes MIDI. Now if I wanted to be old school about it, of course what that now means is I could do exactly what I've done with our kind of touche pad part, which is that I could convert it into audio, I could go through and I could chop it up and I could match it to the Ellis Island beat. But I've made a video elsewhere on the channel about creating groove templates. So in other words, what I could do would be to make a groove template from this audio file and then apply it to the audio version of this region. So whether or not you want to get the scissors out and go really old school in terms of your audio editing, whether or not you want to ever so slightly use sort of flex editing to create groove templates and apply those to different things, there are loads of ways in which you can take audio that isn't quite sitting in time with your projects and get it in time in order to create the kind of groove and feel that you want to bring to your productions.